This story is titled, My Cheating Wife Believed Her Affair Would Strengthen Our Marriage, but I had a different plan. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey folks, I never imagined I'd end up posting here, but life has a funny way of flipping you on your head. I'm Jacob and my wife Mallory, 30 female, and I had been married for 6 years. Honestly, I thought we were solid. A team. Sunday mornings were for pancakes, we took pottery classes for laughs, and we'd spend hours painting this ridiculous Christmas village every year. It wasn't flashy, but it worked for us. Mallory was my best friend. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have told you I am the luckiest man ever. Sure, we had little fights, like whose turn it was to clean the gutters or who left their shoes by the door, but we always worked through it. At least, that's what I thought. Our marriage wasn't one of those grand cinematic love stories. It was built on routines and small joys. And honestly, I liked it that way. Every Friday night was pizza and movie night, where we'd argue about what to watch before settling on something we'd seen 100 times. We'd groan about laundry together, split chores, and make dumb jokes about how romantic it was to fold socks side by side. I didn't think anything was missing, but apparently, Mallory did. It started so small that I didn't even register it as a shift at first. Mallory started spending more time on her phone. Nothing crazy, just little moments here and there. At dinner, she'd be scrolling while I told her about my day. On the couch, she'd be messaging while we watched TV. I chalked it up to the usual social media rabbit holes or her work group chat, which always seemed overly active for people who were supposed to be clocked out. But then she started talking about these ideas she'd picked up from somewhere. Self-improving books, podcasts, or maybe some influencer. Stuff about growing in new directions or challenging traditional structures. At first, I just nodded along. It felt like one of those phases people go through when they suddenly grow a passion for improving themselves. Then it all disappears after a month or so. Have you ever thought about how traditional marriage might hold people back? She asked me one night while we were doing dishes. I shrugged. Not really. I think we're doing okay. She gave me this tight-lipped smile and said, Yeah, but what if we could do even better? It didn't seem worth arguing about, so I let it go. Maybe she'd read some blog post and was just spitballing, but she brought it up again a week later while we were folding laundry. Do you think we ever stop growing because we're too comfortable? She asked. Mallory, I said, laughing a little. I think we've got enough growth dealing with laundry piles and grocery bills. She laughed too, but it felt a little forced. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mallory had always been the curious type, the kind of person who could get obsessed with a random topic and dive headfirst into it. She was the one who got us into painting Christmas villages after seeing some fancy display at a friend's house. And before I knew it, our dining room table was covered in tiny, brightly colored houses. So when she started waxing philosophical about marriage and relationships, I figured it was just another one of her passing interests. Then things started to shift, and those changes were hard to ignore. It began subtly. Mallory started dressing a little nicer for work. At first, it was just a new blouse or a pair of shoes, but soon it was a noticeable upgrade. Makeup every day, even on Fridays when she used to keep it casual. And then the perfume, the one she used to save for date nights, suddenly became an everyday thing. I joked about her trying to win Employee of the Month, and she just laughed it off, saying, I just want to feel good about myself. Fair enough, right? Her work habits changed as well. Mallory was never the kind of person to bring work home. She left her laptop at the office and didn't care much for talking about workplace drama. Suddenly, though, she was staying late more and more often. She'd say, We're swamped, or There's this big deadline coming up. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd never given me a reason to doubt her before. Then there was her phone. Mallory used to leave it lying around wherever, on the counter, the nightstand, or the armrest of the couch. Now it was glued to her side. She'd keep it face down or tucked into her pocket, which was odd enough to catch my attention. One night, while we were watching TV, her phone buzzed nonstop. I glanced over, half annoyed, and said, What's with all the notifications? Work group chat blowing up or something? Oh yeah, she said quickly, grabbing the phone and silencing it without even checking. Just some group chat stuff. Nothing important. Her tone was casual, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The Mallory I knew didn't care about group chats or notifications, and suddenly, my mind was swimming with questions I didn't want to ask. but couldn't ignore anymore. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. It could all be innocent, I told myself. People go through phases. Maybe she was just stressed or needed some space. I even tried stepping up my game, planning little date nights or bringing home her favorite chocolate. But she was distracted, always just a little too busy or too tired. One night, I asked her outright, "Is something going on?" "What do you mean?" she said, looking genuinely surprised. "You've just seemed distant. Is everything okay?" She reached out and touched my arm. "Of course. I'm just tired. Work's been a lot lately." Her words were reassuring, but her tone didn't match, and the questions kept stacking up. Why was she so guarded with her phone? Why was she suddenly so interested in challenging traditional structure? And why did it feel like she was always somewhere else, even when she was right next to me? It was around this time that I started noticing little inconsistencies in her stories. She'd say she had a late meeting, but when I asked how it went, she'd look confused for a second before answering. She mentioned a work dinner once, but later slipped up and said she'd just grabbed takeout. And that was enough to make me wonder. I started paying closer attention, not in a creepy way, but just keeping track of what she said versus what she did. And that's when I realized something was definitely off. But it wasn't until her new friend Becca entered the picture that things really started unraveling. Becca was this coworker Mallory had started hanging out with, recently divorced and absolutely brimming with wisdom. According to Mallory, Becca was a free spirit who had discovered herself after her marriage ended. To me, she sounded more like someone who watched too many self-help YouTube videos and thought she was a life coach. Every time Mallory spent time with Becca, she'd come back buzzing with a new revolutionary idea about marriage, relationships, or whatever trendy nonsense Becca was peddling that week. Becca was all about modernizing marriage and embracing freedom within love, whatever that means. Red flags? Oh yeah, they were waving hard enough to generate a small hurricane. But Mallory ate it up like it was gospel. One night, we were cleaning up after dinner when Mallory asked, out of nowhere, "Do you think couples can grow by expanding their experiences?" I paused. "What kind of experiences are we talking about here?" She shrugged, trying to play it casual. "You know, like exploring new dynamics. Becca says it can really bring people closer." "Ah, well, if Becca says," I muttered under my breath. Mallory shot me a look. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just feels like Becca's in our marriage more than I am these days." Mallory rolled her eyes. "She's just really insightful. You'd actually like her if you gave her a chance." Somehow, I doubted that. But Becca wasn't just a walking self-help book. She was apparently a recruiter for her own little club of modern thinkers, and Mallory was her star pupil. Every time they hung out, it felt like I was getting a new version of my wife, one with slightly less grip on reality. One evening, Mallory came home with this big grin on her face and said, "Becca and I were talking about how love evolves over time. Did you know some couples grow stronger by embracing change, not resisting it?" "Cool story," I replied, not looking up from the show I was watching. "Don't you think that's interesting?" she pushed, sitting next to me. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "If change means eating at new restaurants or going on a vacation, I'm all for it." "No," she said, frowning a little. "I mean, bigger changes, like thinking outside the box in relationships." I muted the TV and looked at her. "Mallory, what box are we thinking outside of now?" She hesitated, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "Nothing. Never mind." It wasn't nothing, but I didn't press it because I was still holding on to the hope that maybe this was just another phase. Then Brian also started popping up in conversation. Brian was Mallory's coworker, someone she mentioned a couple of times in the past, but suddenly his name was everywhere. "Brian has such an interesting take on relationships," she'd say while we were eating dinner. Or, "Brian thinks society puts too much pressure on monogamy." Apparently, Brian was like the male version of Becca, only slimier. Married, charming, and smooth-talking to a fault, Brian sounded like the kind of guy who'd sell you a timeshare and make you think you'd won the lottery. Now for me, guys like Brian exist in every workplace, and Mallory's not stupid. But the way she talked about him, it was like he wasn't just a coworker. He was a philosopher, a guru, the Steve Jobs of relationships. I didn't know why she was so caught up with these types of people all of a sudden. One night, I finally said, "You sure Brian's wife is cool with all these enlightened takes of his?" She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, it's easy to talk about breaking the rules of marriage when you've got someone at home cooking for you." Mallory sighed. "You always assume." Brian and his wife have a very open and honest relationship. "Do they?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or is that just what Brian says?" She didn't answer, which frankly told me a lot. It was around this time I noticed Mallory was texting even more, always on her phone, typing away like her life depended on it. When I asked who she was talking to, the answer was always the same. "Oh, just Becca." But sometimes her phone would buzz late at night, and when I glanced over, she'd flip it face down. That wasn't like her. Normally, she didn't care if I saw her messages, but now, it was like she was guarding state secrets. But one particular evening, while we were watching TV, her phone buzzed for the third time in a row. I glanced at the screen before she could flip it over and caught the name. Brian. Brian texts you after hours now? I asked, keeping my tone light. She looked flustered for half a second, then shrugged. It's just work stuff. I wasn't buying it. What really got under my skin was how Mallory started spouting Becca and Brian's nonsense like it was gospel. Stuff like, society's views on relationships are so outdated, or marriage shouldn't be about ownership, it should be about freedom. I let her finish before cutting in, calm but firm. Mallory, I don't own you, and I've never tried to. So what's the point you're trying to make? She hesitated, then dove right back in. It's not about you specifically. It's just, Becca says people get stuck in routines, and Brian thinks couples grow stronger when they explore new connections. I leaned back in my chair, locking eyes with her. So, Becca and Brian, huh? Sounds like they've got all the answers. When did they become the authority on our marriage? Her laugh was short, but I didn't flinch. You're overreacting. They're just sharing ideas. No, I said, keeping my tone steady. They're overstepping. What works for Becca and Brian doesn't have to work for us. I'm not interested in their version of growth, and frankly, I don't think you are either. You've always been better than this, Mallory. She tried to shrug it off, but I could see I'd hit a nerve. You're being close-minded, she muttered, avoiding my gaze. Call it what you want, I said, leaning forward. But I know who I am, and I know what kind of life we've built. I'm not going to let someone else's philosophy tear that apart. She didn't respond, just gave me a look like I was speaking a different language. And maybe I was. Maybe she'd already started listening to them more than me. But if Becca and Brian thought they could rewrite the rules of my marriage, they were about to find out they didn't get a vote. Still, that message Brian sent her late at night stuck in my head. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed to dig deep. The next morning, as we sat over breakfast, I decided to test the waters. So, how's Brian been? I asked casually, keeping my tone light as I buttered my toast. Mallory froze for the briefest moment. He's fine, I guess. Why? No reason, I said with a shrug, pretending to be indifferent. You used to mention him a lot. Just realized I haven't heard about him lately. Her smile was tight, almost forced. Well, we don't talk that much. He's just a coworker. Right, I said, nodding, though my mind was already working through her reaction. Something wasn't sitting right, and I wasn't about to let it slide. It was such a weird answer, like she was trying to downplay his importance now. And that's when it hit me. She was hiding something. Eventually, I hit my limit. The doubts, the weird excuses, the constant mentions of Brian, it was like my brain was screaming at me to stop ignoring the obvious. I didn't need a gut feeling anymore. I needed cold, hard proof. One night, Mallory was in the shower and her phone was sitting on the bathroom counter. Normally, I wouldn't go near it. I've always been big on trust, but that trust had been chipped away one inconsistency at a time. This wasn't a moment for restraint. It was a moment for answers. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat as I grabbed her phone. Her passcode was the same. She hadn't even thought to change. My hands were shaking as I opened it, but anger steadied them. I went straight to her messages, scrolling until I found what I was looking for, Brian. The moment I opened the thread, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. The messages weren't outright graphic, but they might as well have been a flashing neon sign. Can't stop thinking about Friday. I already miss you. You're the only one who really understands me. And then the one that sent my blood boil. We should be more careful. Don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. I'm the wrong idea? Are you kidding me? I clenched my fist so hard I thought I'd crush the phone. The wrong idea? What's the right idea here, Brian? That you're just sharing deep, meaningful talks about team projects? That her team dinner was actually a late-night strategy meeting? I wanted to scream, to burst into the bathroom and shove the phone in her face. But instead, I took screenshots, every damning message, and sent them to myself. It wasn't about covering my bases anymore. I wanted these receipts burned into my memory. When I put the phone back exactly where I found it, my hands were trembling. I was in pure rage. I couldn't believe the nerve of her. The lies, the manipulation, the smug little texts they thought were so clever. It all made me sick. The next few days were torture. Every time Mallory spoke, I wanted to snap. Every time she smiled at me, I wanted to shout, "How dare you?" But I kept my cool. I needed to play this carefully, not for her sake, but for mine. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking she had the upper hand. At dinner, I'd ask seemingly innocent questions, testing her ability to lie straight to my face. So, when's the next team dinner? I asked casually, keeping my voice light. Oh, probably not for a while, she said, her eyes darting to the side. She couldn't even look at me. Too bad, I said, forcing a smile. I thought you liked those. They're fine. she said quickly, almost cutting me off as she changed the subject to something pointless, like the weather. It was pathetic. The way she squirmed under even the most basic questions told me everything I needed to know. Her deflections were so obvious. It only fueled my determination to uncover the rest of the truth. Every time I replayed those messages in my head, I felt a fresh wave of anger. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or was there more? The questions kept piling up, but there was one thing I knew for sure. Mallory wasn't the person I thought she was. And that jerk Brian? Oh, I was going to make sure Brian regretted ever thinking he could pull this off. So I decided to confront her because I had enough of this nonsense. That night, I'd gone over every scenario in my head, from her breaking down in tears to her doubling down and denying everything. Honestly, I didn't even know what I wanted from the confrontation. Answers, maybe, or just the satisfaction of watching her squirm. Either way, I was done pretending I didn't know. But before I could even get the words out, Mallory walked into the living room with that overly serious look she gets when she's about to deliver one of her big ideas. She sat down across from me, hands clasped together like she was about to pitch me a groundbreaking business proposal. "Can we talk?" she asked. I was thrown for a second. She seemed to have news, so I let her go first before I made my showdown. Yeah. What's up?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the coffee table before landing back on me. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about our marriage." Okay, that got my attention. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Go on." "Well," she started, "I feel like maybe we've gotten a little stuck, like we're just going through the motions instead of really growing together." "Stuck?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" She bit her lip, clearly trying to find the right word. "I just think there are ways we can strengthen our connection. You know, try something different, something that could make us stronger in the long run." I stared at her, completely baffled. She wasn't saying it outright, but I knew exactly what she was dancing around. This wasn't about us. This was about her, Brian, and whatever idiotic fantasy they'd cooked up. "You think we need to try something different to strengthen our marriage?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as possible. She nodded earnestly, like she really believed what she was saying. "I think it could be good for us. I know it sounds unconventional, but I truly believe it could bring us closer together." "Unconventional how?" I pressed, trying to get her to say the quiet part out loud. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Well, I was thinking that maybe I could go on a few dates, just to see what it's like to explore connections outside of us. Nothing serious, of course, just something to help us grow." For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. A few dates? Was she serious? I blinked, waiting for her to laugh or backtrack or say it was some kind of twisted joke. But no, she just sat there, looking at me with this earnest, hopeful expression, like she'd just suggested a new workout plan. I could feel my anger bubbling under the surface, but instead of letting it boil over, I took a deep breath and forced a small smile. "You know what, Mallory? Sure, let's try something different. If that's what you think will help us, then go for it." Her face lit up like I'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Really? You mean it?" "Absolutely," I said, nodding. "Do whatever you need to do. I trust you." The stupidity of it all was almost laughable. She actually thought I was agreeing with her, but in reality, I was already planning my next move. Over the next few days, as she went on with her explorations, I started digging deeper into Brian, both online and through people who knew him. I'd already seen enough to know he wasn't just some innocent coworker, but the more I looked, the worse it got. Turns out Brian had a bit of a reputation. He'd pulled this same routine with multiple women at the office, making them feel special, manipulating them into thinking he cared, and then tossing them aside when things got messy. Mallory wasn't special to him. She was just another name on his list, and she fell easily into it. To confirm what I already suspected, I reached out to one of Mallory's coworkers, a woman named Ashley. Mallory had always been weirdly jealous of Ashley, probably because Ashley was smart, confident, and didn't tolerate nonsense. We'd met a couple of times at office events, and I remembered her as sharp and no-nonsense. I sent Ashley a quick message, explaining the situation in vague terms. Her reply came almost immediately, and she didn't hold back. "Brian's a creep. He's been doing this to women here for years. He makes them feel like they're the only ones who get him, and then moves on when it's no longer convenient. Everyone sees through him, except the ones he's targeting." She even mentioned one woman who left the company entirely after Brian's antics caused chaos in her life. When I revisited Mallory's text with Brian, it all clicked. His lines about feeling seen and finding deeper connections weren't unique to her. They were part of a script he used to reel in women who didn't know better. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about Mallory anymore. Brian had manipulated her and tossed her into the same cycle he'd put so many other women through. I couldn't believe how she trusted him and shattered everything we built over the years. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to confront Mallory. I was going to blow her entire fantasy apart. I started by preparing the divorce papers. I was sure that there was no coming back from them, not after everything I'd seen and heard. She really thought she could drag me through her twisted version of modern love. Then I asked Ashley for a favor. Would you be willing to help me make a point? I asked, explaining my plan. Ashley didn't hesitate. Absolutely. He's long overdue for a dose of reality. With her help, I set the stage. Mallory wasn't just going to hear about Brian's true nature, she was going to see it for herself. That Friday, everything was in place. Mallory had told me earlier in the week she'd be working late. I knew exactly what that meant, but I played along like the fool she clearly thought I was. I'd even wished her luck with her big project, my voice dripping with mock sincerity. She didn't bother asking about my plans, likely assuming I'd be sitting around clueless while she did whatever she and Brian had cooked up. When Mallory walked in earlier than expected, she was met with the sight of me and Ashley sitting comfortably on the couch. Ashley looked incredible. Her sleek black dress and confident posture made her impossible to ignore. Her legs were crossed at the ankle, and she sipped her drink with the kind of poise that said she wasn't intimidated by anything, least of all Mallory. Mallory froze in the doorway, her keys halfway to the counter. Her face shifted through a range of emotions: confusion, panic, and then rage. She stared at us like she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. "Hey," I said casually, standing up and giving her a smile. "You're home early." What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaky as she glanced between me and Ashley. "Oh, nothing much," I said, gesturing toward Ashley with a relaxed hand. "Just a little date night. You remember Ashley, right? From your office?" Ashley turned to her, giving her a polite but sharp smile. "Hi, Mallory. Nice to see you again," she said, her voice perfectly calm, almost mocking. "A date?" Mallory's voice cracked. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, my tone cold and unflinching. "You've been so interested in exploring new dynamics and trying something different. I figured I'd take a page out of your book." Her face turned a deep shade of red as she sputtered, You're on a date? In our house? While we're still married?" Ashley tilted her head slightly, her smirk widening. "He's been an absolute gentleman all evening. Honestly, Mallory, I don't know how you let him slip away." "Shut up," Mallory snapped at Ashley before turning her glare back to me. "Jacob, what the hell is this? Are you trying to humiliate me?" "No," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "You did that all by yourself. Or did you think I wouldn't notice your working late lies, your pathetic excuses, or your little plan to strengthen our marriage with Brian?" She flinched at Brian's name, her composure slipping even further. "It's not what you think," she started, her voice cracking with desperation. "Save it," I interrupted, walking to the coffee table. I grabbed the folder with the divorce papers and slammed it down in front of her. The sound echoed through the room, leaving no room for doubt about what was happening. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady and sharp. "You're going to sign these papers, pack your things, and get out of my house. You can go explore connections with Brian or whoever else you want, but you're not doing it under my roof." Her eyes widened as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jacob, no. Please, we can fix this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. You treated me like a fool while you played your little games. And now you want to stay? Not a chance." "Jacob, please," she begged, her voice cracking as she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I'll stop. I'll cut ties with Brian. Just please don't do this." Ashley stood up then, her confidence unshaken, as she glanced between us. "Should I leave?" she asked, her tone calm but tinged with amusement. "This seems like it's getting personal." "No," I said, my eyes locked on Mallory, who was trembling now. "She should stay. After all, Mallory, you've been so eager for a new dynamic. Maybe it's my turn now." That was the final blow. Mallory let out a strangled sob and turned on her heel, bolting up the stairs. The sound of her feet pounding on the floorboards was followed by the slam of the bedroom door. I followed her upstairs, my steps measured and deliberate. By the time I reached the bedroom doorway, she was frantically throwing clothes into a suitcase, her hands shaking as she zipped it up. "You can take whatever you need tonight," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But I expect you to be gone by tomorrow. I've already changed the utilities to my name, and your access to the bank accounts is cut off. This is over, Mallory. Get used to it." She froze for a moment, staring at me like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then, with trembling hands, she yanked the suitcase off the bed and stormed past me without a word. Back downstairs, Ashley was still waiting, casually straightening her dress. When the front door slammed behind Mallory, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, that was satisfying." "More than you know," I replied, sinking into the couch. The morning after Mallory left was so quiet, and I wasn't drowning in frustration or waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. She was gone, her suitcase and her delusions of strengthening our marriage along with her. The silence was liberating, but the storm she'd left behind was just starting to ripple out. But she didn't go quietly. She called me 3 times that day, leaving desperate voicemails full of apologies, excuses, and promises. I didn't mean it. I was stupid. Brian doesn't mean anything to me. Please call me back. I didn't bother listening to the rest of them. They all sounded the same. Hollow words from someone who was only sorry she got caught. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. There was still paperwork to sort out, but I wasn't in a rush. She'd already made her choices, and I was focused on mine. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to Brian. As satisfying as it was to kick Mallory out of the house, knowing that Slimeball was still out there, doing the same thing to other women didn't sit right with me. It wasn't enough to just be done with them. I wanted to make sure he felt the weight of his action. I reached out to Ashley again. She connected me with 2 other women from the office who had also been burned by Brian's manipulative games. Hearing their stories was like deja vu. Flirty texts, emotional manipulation, and empty promises that fell apart the second things got complicated. One of them had even filed a complaint with HR, but Brian's charm and good guy image had kept him out of trouble. Not this time. Together, we compiled everything we had: texts, emails, screenshots of his inappropriate messages, and statements from the women he'd strung along. Ashley was the one who took the evidence to HR, and within a week, Brian's name was the talk of the office. The investigation moved quickly, and by the end of the month he was gone, fired, disgraced, and, as I later learned, dealing with a very unhappy wife of his own. Speaking of Mallory, she didn't take my silence well. After a week of unanswered calls, she showed up at the house unannounced. I heard the knock at the door and knew immediately it was her. Ashley had told me she'd heard through the grapevine that Brian had ghosted her after the fallout, and I figured it was only a matter of time before she came crawling back. I opened the door, and there she was, puffy-eyed, dressed like she hadn't slept in days, and clutching a folder. "Jacob, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we just talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You made your choice, and I made mine." "Brian lied to me," she blurted out. "He said this was normal, that it would bring us closer. He was just using me." I leaned against the doorframe. "And you fell for it. You listened to him instead of me, and now you want sympathy?" Her eyes filled with tears again, and she shook her head. "I was stupid. I didn't see what I was doing. Please, Jacob, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I sighed, stepping back slightly. "Mallory, it's not about fixing it anymore. It's about accountability. You wanted freedom? You got it? Now it's time to live with the consequence." Then she hit me with the classic, "But I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "You loved the idea of me. You didn't respect me enough to tell the truth. Love doesn't mean anything without trust, and we don't have that anymore." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I think she realized there was no coming back from this. "I understand," she said quietly. She handed me the folder in her hands, the signed divorce papers, and turned to leave. After Mallory was out of my life for good, I felt something I hadn't felt in peace. It wasn't just about being free of her betrayal. It was about finally having clarity about what I deserved. Ashley and I stayed in touch too. She was quick to remind me that I'd dodged a bullet with Mallory, and while we didn't exactly start dating, there was an undeniable connection. Maybe it would turn into something more one day, maybe not. But for now, it was nice to have someone who actually respected me. As for Mallory, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents. And I won't lie, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing Mallory got a taste of the humiliation she'd put me through. But at the end of the day, I wasn't focused on her anymore. She was the past, and I had no intention of looking back. I had my life back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was mine to live.